it took me a while really to figure this one out, that you just have to keep doing the skills over and over and over. And, if you're triggered and then you've gotten through something, and then the backlash as well, the way, OCD tries to get you to analyze the threat and the spread and the danger and all these sorts of things, it's just that relentless use of skills. So, you can increase that with the intention and reflection practice. The morning, every morning you set your intention and you think, okay, when I'm triggered, I am gonna practice diffusion and engagement in the present moment, and I'm gonna keep doing that relentlessly. So that's one thing you can do. You can do mental rehearsals when you know you're going to be facing challenging things. So you try and get ahead of it and you anticipate where it's going to show up. And then just the daily skills practice as well. If you do enough of that, it then does start to come to you, in the moment. There's some of the things I think have been most helpful. You can do things like set alarms, random alarms to just remind you to use skills. So throughout the day, you set 5 alarms at different times, and hopefully one or two of them will land on an episode when you're kind of caught with it, and it'll be the reminder to use skills. So that's another thing you can do. Journaling, I'm going to add a worksheet in about journaling. Sometimes just writing helps to get it into the forefront of your mind a little bit more, and reminds you to sort of use the skills. And I'll add a worksheet to the folder that gives my take on using journaling to support this. So I think they're all ways, I would say, to increase the likelihood that you remember or you manage to do it in the moment. So yeah, that's the key one. How do we get the skills coming to us in the moment and practice them relentlessly? It's huge, huge part. Like I've been talking to people all week about that, to be honest. It's just such an important part of recovery. Theory does help, and that the more you absorb this theory and you do understand it, that will support things. But really, the practice is the key. So you want to do like, yes, read everything, get it in your head, think about the sequence of skills, think about how do I apply it to my OCD in my situation, and then practice, 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 practice. Figure out what your daily practice routine looks like, commit to it, commit to 3 months, see how you're doing after 3 months, commit to 6 months, see how you're doing after 6 months. Really, practice is the key. Um, when I was struggling, and then when I started to have bigger breakthroughs, I was thinking about recovery a lot, a little bit like, I don't know, someone about to take on some sort of challenge. I don't know, you're going to run your marathon or you're going to do some sort of endurance challenge, something like that. You might be really thinking about your training plan. What am I going to do about fatigue? How am I going to avoid injury? How am I going to protect my body? Like, people who are committed to stuff will think about it a lot. And that's what it felt like to me. I was either practicing, trying to do values-based stuff, or some time of the day I was thinking about, how do I make this stuff work? Now, the caveat is that can very easily become compulsive, and it did for me as well. So it wasn't like it was all strategic, goal-focused thinking. No, it was sort of half and half. Sometimes I was doing mental compulsions about recovery, and it was that meta OCD, the sort of recovery focused OCD. And then other times it was very helpful and it was really helping me implement this stuff. So I would say, try to think about it each day. That could be motivation, reflection, thinking about why you want to recover, what will happen if we don't push the recovery further, what will life look like. My life is important. I don't want to lose time to this. Really do that sort of reflection every day. You might be thinking about the skills sequence and, what, how do I apply everything Jonny's talked about in this skill sequence to ERP? You might be like an athlete going, right, mental rehearsal, game plan. What am I going to do in this situation? Then afterwards, how did I do? Well, I did really well until the emotion got really strong. And then I went off into my compulsions. Okay, I've got to work on that acceptance of the emotion. Or actually I was passively ruminating and I didn't even notice, okay, got to do more diffusion skills and set the goal to catch the rumination more. I'm still holding this belief very deeply that my thoughts are important and the same as action. Okay, I've got to work on unworkable beliefs and trying to reduce the impact of those beliefs. So you really want to be thinking of it like that and spending some time each day thinking about it. Now, the sign it's compulsive is you'll just be going over the same stuff. There'll be that doubt, uncertainty. It won't be leading to practical steps and action you can take. So you want to watch out for that. That's not going to be so helpful and treat that like OCD. But I do think thinking about it could be very helpful with the point we were saying earlier of remembering to use your skills in the moment when you're really triggered, if you've thought about it a lot, it's going to be more there. It's like it's at the surface of your brain a little bit more ready to go. So I would say that that was helpful. And reading, reading other people's recovery stories, and I put some inspiring recovery stories, like a document in there that has some of them. We're going to try and add more to that over the next few weeks and months. So I listened. I mean, inspiration from people who had recovered was one of the most helpful things to me, if I'm honest. I was listening to them a lot. Again, sometimes compulsively, sometimes a bit reassurance that it was possible and all that sort of stuff. But then other times it was more firing me up for recovery, and I was learning little ideas here and there. Like the one we were saying earlier about the skills in the moment. I was talking to one of my clients today, and he was saying, like, the thing about working with me is he hadn't heard that message ever before, that you just sometimes need to keep doing skills over and over and over for, I say an hour, 4 hours, 8 hours a day, 3 days, 3 weeks. This, like, you can sometimes have to do skills a long time to really get diffusion, get, out of the compulsions and back into your life. And he was saying that was the thing that he'd heard from me. And like I did discover that through my own experience, but I was also inspired by other people. Like Russ Harris talked about, he in his Happiness Trap, the first edition, he had some examples of like a client going through grief who had alcohol addictions and how she used skills, she used diffusion and acceptance continuously to ride through large waves of this grief and this urge to drink and things. And he also gave the example of someone who came to a workshop who had a brain tumor and not very long to live. And she shared it with him early on. And she said, like, I really want to be here, but I'm freaking out. And he went through diffusion and we've only covered some diffusion techniques. There's a lot more. And he covered the one named the story. So it was like the scary brain tumor story. And she would notice and name that and then refocus on the workshop. And he said she did it over and over. And by, a morning or a day and a bit of that, she was starting to have some diffusion. She was starting to have engagement in the workshop, and she was able to use that to help her cope with this really difficult, awful situation and that kind of thing. And there were other people as well talking about this. So I was reading that, and there were people whose recovery stories had been this sort of intense practice. And I like the metaphor of the endurance event, and you're it's like you're running an ultra marathon, and you just keep using the skills to focus on one step after another and just keep moving. And okay, I get to that milestone, and then that milestone, and then that milestone, and how do I get some distance from fatigue and pain and the urge to give up the race, and how do I engage back? And I use my values to motivate me, and I use the achievement of goals to motivate me, but I also sometimes just use massive acceptance and focus on the present moment, one step after another. I just heard Ross Edgley, who's the guy who swam around Great Britain, and he's swimming around Iceland just now. He's swimming around the whole of Iceland. It's like is it 1,000 miles or something? It's like a ridiculous amount. And he was saying like he uses a lot of joy. He uses a lot of like meaning and connection to his goals and his purpose and contribution to sports science. And he uses a lot of supportive self-talk, but sometimes he goes feral, he says, and he just is really in the moment and just trying to push on and trying to endure and trying to accept. And he says he uses those different techniques and things like that were really inspiring me. The idea of just how do you continuously keep going when things are really tough. And then I got some traction with it and it was most helpful. That together with targeted daily practice. So ACT skills, ERP daily, and then this in the moment practice, those two things were the most helpful to me. And I was massively inspired by other people. So listen to podcasts, listen to other people. I've got a page on our blog where I have the podcasts I've done and then some of my clients that have done them and things like that. So, listen to these things and try and get inspired and revved up. And, especially in a crisis, I mean, even if it is slightly compulsive, I always think it's a better compulsion to listen to some inspiring recovery stories than it is to go off and start researching OCD, your OCD fear or whatever. So that would be a big one is just using that inspiration. um, Setbacks, slips, relapses, these things are all common in OCD recovery work. I went through a lot of that. And the key is to try and learn every time you feel yourself go back a step, do a chain analysis. What happened chain by chain? What was the trigger? Were there external stresses in my life? How did I start doing compulsions again? What kind of mental compulsions was I doing? Really analyze like an athlete. In dialectical behavior therapy, they call it chain analysis. So you just look at the detail of what kind of happened, what can I learn from it, and how can I get my skills back in there earlier, and what can I do next time to learn from that setback. And I did a lot of that. That was another thing I was reflecting a lot on. So it would, Kimberly Quinlan in her self-compassion for OCD and ERP book. It's a great book, by the way. She has a graph in it where it's the expected line of recovery and then the actual one. And the expected one's like this linear, nice line, and the real one's all over the place, up and down, right down to the bottom and then back up. And that's how it is. I often feel I'm on a roller coaster with my clients. It gets better and better, right? If we can learn from the setbacks and if we can, get something new from it and just be relentless with it and never give in and just be gently relentless, I say, because relentless on its own could feel a bit forceful and controlling. So the gentle relentlessness is like I just like a river carving its valley through the mountain. I'm just gently carving these new neural pathways that will keep me, you know, going towards recovery. And it's all about relentlessness. And it's very hard because, as we said before, OCD is just super convincing, is really one of the main reasons why it's hard.